Story 1. She wasn't in the rear view until I looked twice. This happened to me in 2019, just outside Reno. Back then, I was doing regional runs for a freight company that specialized in temperature-sensitive loads. I usually stuck to Nevada and parts of Northern California, long, uneventful desert drives and empty rest stops. At the time, I was a few months into a schedule that had me running nights by choice. Less traffic, fewer way stations, and the quiet helped me think. I liked the solitude. One night, I was driving westbound on US 50. They call it the loneliest road in America, and it earns that name. It was after midnight. Cold. The sky was moonless and the air felt too still, like the wind had just quit. I was hauling a reefer load of processed poultry to Sacramento. I had 6 hours ahead of me and wasn't planning on stopping. My cab was clean mostly. I'd just done a full reorganization a few days earlier, new dash mat, cleaned the floor, even replaced the cracked sun visor. Everything felt in order. That night I kept getting this weird sensation that something was behind me. Not another car. The mirrors were empty. But a weight, like when a friend's riding in the jump seat and you can feel the shift in the suspension. But I was alone. I told myself I was tired, that I was just feeling the weight of the trailer or the engine torque. Still, it nagged at me. Around 1:15 a.m. I glanced at the rear view again, just a habitual check, empty. Then, and I remember this in a way that's hard to explain, I thought I saw something, not in the mirror itself, more like next to it, on the edge of my vision. A figure. But when I looked directly, there was nothing there, just road and reflection. I didn't think much of it at the time. You get used to tricks of light out there. You're surrounded by dark, and the brain fills it in. But about 20 minutes later, I saw it again. This time I wasn't looking in the mirror. I was just driving. And there it was, not visible but known. In the passenger side peripheral, a shape, not moving, not clear, like someone sitting there but turned slightly toward me. I refused to look. That sounds ridiculous when I say it now, but there was something in me, some reflex, that said don't confirm it. Because if I turned and saw nothing, I'd be crazy. But if I turned and saw something, I adjusted the seat, changed the radio, took a sip of coffee that had long gone cold, still felt it. The shape stayed in that exact spot in my peripheral vision for another hour. Didn't blink, didn't move. I even scratched at the edge of my face like I was wiping sweat just to try and catch a glance without turning fully. I caught something. It wasn't a full face, more like a shoulder, a partial silhouette. The top of a head, too tall to be normal unless they were pressed to the ceiling, and then it was gone. I kept driving, forcing myself not to react, just scan the road, keep the wheel steady. But the moment I glanced in the mirror again, I mean really looked, I swear to you there was a face, just for a fraction of a second. The kind of flash that makes you question if it ever really happened. No features, just dark skin and darker eyes. Still, watching. I slammed on the brakes hard enough to set off the cabin alarm. There was nothing there. After that night, I avoided driving through Nevada for a while, took runs up through Oregon and Idaho instead, told dispatch it was a tire issue just to get out of that route. But even with the change in scenery, the feeling followed me. I started noticing the reflection in places it shouldn't be. Not always clear, sometimes just a warped outline. Like when I'd check the side mirror to change lanes, and I'd swear there was something tall, almost insect-like, hunched on the back steps of the trailer. But when I'd pull over and check, nothing. I tried taping over the mirrors. First duct tape, then cardboard. Didn't help. The reflection showed up elsewhere. In the chrome strip that ran along the dash. In the surface of the plastic water bottle I kept in the cup holder. Even once in the side of a gas pump, the blackened, scratched metal curved just enough to give a faint echo of the cab. And there it was, standing, motionless, behind me. I blinked, and it was gone. It got to the point where I stopped looking at reflections altogether, used my ears and feel to back into docks, didn't check behind me on night shifts, But the more I ignored it, the more it felt like it moved closer. The moment that convinced me it wasn't in my head was in late December, outside of Fresno. I'd pulled over at a quiet way station just before dawn, grabbed coffee from the kiosk, and sat on the front step of the cab, door open. The coffee lid was one of those cheap white ones, thin, semi-reflective. I raised it to my mouth and saw something behind me in the curve of the lid's plastic. Not moving, not blinking, just behind my left shoulder, inside the cab. I froze, didn't drink, didn't breathe. Then I turned slowly. There was no one there, but I swear the smell changed, like old copper and ammonia, like something trying to remember how to be human but only getting halfway there. I started sleeping during the day after that, refused to drive at night, didn't stop the sightings though. Now the reflections didn't wait for mirrors. It had been 5 nights straight on the road without conversation, no stops longer than 15 minutes. I was hauling mixed freight to upstate Washington, snow in the forecast. I told myself it was just fatigue, loneliness, mental artifacts of sleep deprivation. But I hadn't seen myself in a mirror since Elko, hadn't dared. And the figure, the co-traveler, as some old drivers called it, was becoming more present. I don't know when it started appearing during the day, but I noticed its presence in shadows cast on dashboard objects, or the side view blind spot camera feed, the faintest glint of something too tall, too still, too wrong. I stopped talking to dispatch, didn't answer my phone. It became a ritual. I'd wake up, check all the windows, then clean every surface. I thought maybe I could wipe it away. That final night, I snapped. I just left a diner in Ellensburg. Snow was starting to come down. I walked back to the truck, climbed in, and looked up. She was in the mirror. A woman, I think, hair draped wet and stringy across her collarbone. Skin too pale to be living, no expression, just watching. I lost it. I punched the mirror full force. Glass shattered, sliced deep into the knuckles of my right hand. Blood hit the steering wheel. The pain was sharp, welcome. But when I looked again, through the windshield, she was still there, in the seat, visible without reflection. She didn't move, just tilted her head slightly, like she was adjusting to the new rules. No longer confined, I opened the door and ran into the snow, left the truck running. I stayed in a motel that night. Didn't check out until a full day later. When I came back, the truck was still there, engine dead, battery drained, mirror still shattered, and the seat empty, but warm. Story 2. The radio picked up something that wasn't broadcast. This happened in 2021, somewhere outside Flagstaff. I'd taken a temporary route through northern Arizona, covering for another driver who'd called in sick. I was between contracts at the time and needed the money. The load wasn't unusual. Standard pallets of dry food supply headed toward New Mexico. I'd be alone for the next 10 hours, one overnight run, no stops except for fuel. It was quiet that night, too quiet for my usual podcasts or YouTube playlists. I'd been trying this thing where I drove in silence just to clear my head. But around midnight I broke down and flicked on the radio. I didn't bother with Bluetooth, just regular AM/FM, whatever local signal I could pick up. I scanned for a while. Static, clicks, 1 or 2 country stations. Then I heard something. A woman's voice, soft, not singing, more like reciting. No music underneath, no ad breaks, just a low, steady voice that said, "Dead curve at mile marker 312, do not drift to the shoulder." The sentence struck me because of how specific it was. I figured it was a weather alert or some sort of traffic broadcast, but when I looked down at the dash, the radio display showed only a string of question marks. No call sign, no station ID. I waited for a follow-up, but the static returned. I glanced at the GPS. I was at mile 280, heading toward 312 in about half an hour. I told myself it was probably a coincidence. An automated loop or pre-recorded safety message, maybe something patched through from a local emergency management station. But when I reached mile 312, I saw the sign. The words weren't exact, but close. Warning, crash site ahead. Do not stop on shoulder. It was a reflective metal sign, nailed to a temporary wooden frame just off the median, a state-issued construction warning by the look of it. Still, I'd heard it first, not similar, identical. The timing didn't make sense. I hadn't passed any warning stations. The radio signal was untagged. The phrasing wasn't stock. I would have ignored it completely if it didn't happen again. 15 minutes later, I heard the same woman. This time she said, "Bridge narrowing in 4 miles. Tractor-trailer merge required." Then nothing. No crackle, no station ID, just a return to silence. 4 miles later, a narrow overpass, the kind where a large truck has to line up dead center to avoid scraping the rails. I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been warned. There were no visible signs. At this point, I turned the radio off, but 5 minutes later, it turned itself back on. I didn't bump the knob. My hands weren't near it. It just clicked back to life, a soft pop through the speakers, and resumed static. Nothing else. No voice, no music, just low, whispery noise that felt too close, like it was coming from the cab. I tried to shut it off again. This time it worked, but from that moment on, the silence didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like waiting. The next few nights were uneventful. I didn't use the radio, stuck to my own thoughts and occasional music through earbuds. But something in me had shifted. I started catching myself muttering aloud, small phrases, mostly just status checks. Stuff like merge left or exits coming up or gonna fuel up after this run. Things I didn't used to say out loud. One night, around 3 a.m., I muttered, stay awake, just to fight the fatigue. And then, half a second later, I heard it. My voice, from the radio. Stay awake, same tone, same pacing, but tinny, degraded, like it had been taped and played back through old cassette. I froze, checked the radio. It was off. I tapped the faceplate. Nothing. I reached down to pull the fuse, but before I could, it said something else, this time in a whisper. You said it first. I remember going cold. The cab wasn't warm to begin with. Heater was busted, but this was different. The kind of cold that comes from inside your bones, the kind that doesn't come from outside air. I pulled over at the next rest stop, killed the engine, sat in the dark for a minute, listening. Nothing. Then a soft click, like a handheld recorder switching modes, and static again, low this time, background only, but I could hear fragments under it, snippets of my voice, things I'd said hours ago. Merge left, let's push through, no stopping till dawn. All repeated, cut and distorted, played back like bad tape, sometimes overlapped, sometimes looped, and then one phrase I never said, you're not alone in here. That one wasn't in my voice. It laughed. Not a full laugh, just an exhale. Short, soft, close, like someone just over my shoulder. I threw open the door and stepped out into the lot. Cold wind, diesel stink. I paced in the dark for 10 minutes before I could even look at the cab again. When I climbed back in, everything was silent, but the dash display had reset. The clock was wrong. The odometer was blinking. I hadn't touched it. I drove straight through to my drop point that night. Didn't stop, didn't sleep, didn't speak aloud. Weeks passed. I tried to forget about it, figured maybe it was sleep deprivation or something electrical. But then I got assigned a new route through Texas, a notoriously long one, Amarillo to Laredo, running straight through a desolate stretch of US 83 known as the Dead Mile. I didn't name it that. Other drivers did. Old CB forums talked about it. Said radios would pick up weird chatter out there, phantom transmissions with no source. Things that didn't make sense. I didn't believe it. Not really. But when I hit mile 198, just past an abandoned gas station and a stretch of scorched guardrail, my CB kicked on. I hadn't touched it. The voice came through instantly. Male, clipped, almost robotic. Breaker 19, do you copy? I waited, thought maybe someone was playing around. Then any units in the southbound lane, stop now, he's crossing again. There was a delay, static, then a woman's voice, breathy, urgent. Tell him not to pick up the hitchhiker. Please, please tell him. I spoke, just instinct, said, "Who is this?" No response. Then a third voice, low and groaning, so close it could have been inside the cab. He already did. The signal cut. The CB light stayed on, but the channel was dead. I turned the unit off completely, pulled the plug, sat there in the dark, no sound. Then, through the air vents, a whisper, not through speakers, through the airflow. "He's still in the back." I didn't want to check. Every inch of me said, "Stay forward, don't move, don't confirm." I started the truck, drove the next 80 miles without looking in the rear view. When I stopped for fuel, I checked the trailer out of some desperate need to prove I was fine. There was nothing in it, just pallets, shrink wrap, clean cargo. But the whisper came again, this time from the passenger side air vent. "Empty now, but not always." That was the last night I drove long haul. I didn't quit right away. I finished out the season, but I never turned the radio on again. Not CB, not FM, nothing. Even now I avoid driving alone after dark, because sometimes, when the engine cuts and everything falls quiet, I still hear the voice, faint, distant, like it's trying to tune back in. Copy that. Stay awake. He already did. And sometimes I swear I still hear myself saying things I don't remember saying, things I haven't said yet. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. I slept in my cab, but woke up 82 miles from where I parked. This happened in early 2020. I was moving produce from Modesto, California, down to Bakersfield, a short haul, all things considered. I'd driven that corridor 100 times. Flat land, long stretches, gas stops spaced like clockwork. I knew every diner, every bad patch of road. Nothing unusual ever happened out there. I'd stopped overnight just outside Kettleman City. There's a truck turnout there, a wide, unlit patch near the edge of some citrus groves. Quiet enough to sleep, but close enough to the highway that I could hit the road at dawn. That night was clear, cold, but no fog, no wind. I remember it specifically because I left the windows cracked. Just a hair, enough to let in the citrus smell and the faint hum of crickets. I didn't even bother drawing the curtains over the sleeper berth, felt safe enough. I climbed into the back, phone charged, alarm set. One for 4:30 a.m., one as backup at 4:45. I remember everything down to the last moment. Pulled the blanket up to my chest, rolled on my side, stared out the windshield for a bit until I drifted off. The next thing I knew, I was waking up, not to my alarm, not to light, but to stillness, unfamiliar stillness. I sat up. First thing I noticed was the windshield. It was streaked, muddy, like I'd driven through something wet and thick. Second thing I noticed, the truck wasn't where I left it. I mean, completely different location. Trees were gone, no groves, just long flat nothing with low, brittle grass and scattered brush. A 2-lane frontage road stretched off behind me. I checked the dash. The engine was cold, freezing cold. Not just off, like it hadn't run for hours. I looked at the clock. 4:47 a.m., the alarm hadn't gone off. My phone was still at 97%. GPS showed a single pin, my last stop, outside Kettleman. But I wasn't there anymore, not even close. I didn't panic right away. I figured maybe I'd gotten up during the night and moved. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. But then I looked at the fuel gauge. It had dropped by less than a quarter, and I was 82 miles away. I did the math in my head, checked it 3 times. I couldn't have moved this rig that far and only burned that little fuel. Not with a trailer attached, not through any terrain. I opened the door and stepped out into the early morning air, cold, dry, and silent. No traffic, no birds, no insects, just empty space, like a set. I walked the length of the cab, looked for skid marks, oil drips, anything to suggest I'd been here for longer than a few minutes. But the ground was undisturbed, except for the deep, clean tracks my tires had left coming in. I didn't recognize the road. I pulled up my phone again, tried to refresh GPS, still showed me at the Citrus Grove turnout, even though I was clearly not there. The rig hadn't moved itself, I hadn't driven it, but something or someone had. Still in disbelief, I crouched to check the tires. That's when I noticed the mud, not just on the treads, packed into the wheel wells, flung up against the undercarriage, even speckled along the trailer's sides. Thick, reddish clay that shouldn't have been there. Kettleman soil is dry and loose, sandy, tan grey. I'd driven through those groves 100 times. The dust kicks up, coats everything, but it never sticks. What I was looking at now was something else. This was wet earth mud, rust-colored, the kind that cakes boots and doesn't shake off. I ran my fingers through the ridges, still moist, fresh. The mud didn't match anything around me. I scanned the landscape, flat fields, dry brush, some low berms, no red clay in sight, no puddles, no construction. Nothing that could explain how the entire bottom half of my truck had been doused in foreign earth. I checked the trailer latch, still locked, no signs of tampering. I even popped the cargo door just to be sure. Everything was as I left it, except me. I walked to the edge of the shoulder, hoping to spot a road sign, a town marker, anything. Nothing. Even the mile markers had been stripped or removed. There were posts, but no text, just empty green panels where lettering should have been. My truck, a 22-ton vehicle, had moved 82 miles on its own without burning fuel, and now bore physical evidence of terrain it had never crossed. I checked the tires again, trying to see if the clay matched any known route. Northern California has some of that earth, certain parts of Utah maybe, but I hadn't been near those places in weeks. That's when I remembered something. An old driver I met at a truck stop years ago. He told me about soil mismatch cases, called it dirt drift. He said sometimes rigs showed up miles from their last known location, covered in mud from counties they'd never driven through. I'd laughed when he said it. Not anymore. The worst part, the clay wasn't just on the tires. It was under the door handle, pressed thin, like a thumbprint. It took me half an hour to calm down enough to get back in the cab. I turned the engine over. It clicked once, like something had drained the power, then caught. The drive back should have been simple. I figured I could retrace my route via GPS, but as soon as I pulled onto the frontage road, the signal cut. No internet, no satellite, just searching. I stayed on that road for maybe 20 minutes. Nothing looked familiar. No towns, no traffic, no signs, just repeated fields of brittle grass and short wire fences. I kept looking for cross streets. There were none. No exits, no merges, just the same repeating curve. At some point, I realized I wasn't passing any gas stations. That alone should have been impossible. Even the remotest stretches of Highway 99 have service stops every 20-30 miles, but there were none. Eventually, I spotted a sign ahead, faded green. I remember leaning forward, squinting for the exit name, but when I got close enough to read it, there were no words, just blank space. The surface had been scrubbed clean, same with the next one, and the next. 3 signs in a row, all blank, like someone had peeled the identifiers off. My stomach was in knots. I started scanning the dashboard, half expecting the odometer to start glitching, but everything looked normal, except for the radio. It wasn't on, but the display lit up. Just 4 words, "You're not back yet." Then it shut off. I pulled to the shoulder and put the rig in park, sat there for a full minute, trying to breathe through it. That's when my phone buzzed. I hadn't touched it, still sitting in the cup holder. New text, no number, just unknown. Message read, "Sleep deeper next time." I didn't reply. I didn't even unlock the phone. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Eventually, the GPS kicked back in. It didn't show the road I was on, just a dot floating on an unmarked grid, but I followed the direction it gave. After an hour of driving, I merged onto a highway I did recognize, Route 46. I was just outside Lost Hills. I filled up at the next station, washed my hands, tried to tell myself it was some kind of fugue state, that I'd sleep-driven or had some kind of blackout. But the time didn't add up. Neither did the mud. Neither did the phone. I checked my call logs. Nothing. But the text was still there. The only one. I've never been able to find that exact stretch of road again. Believe me, I tried. Other drivers have stories like mine. Most won't talk. The ones who do mention things like the lost highway or limbo miles. No entry, no exit, just a kind of gap where you can be moved and without movement, touched without contact, driven without memory. I don't sleep in the cab anymore. If I can't find a motel, I stay awake. Because something was in there with me that night, and whatever it was, it knows how to drive.